In the previous modules, we have been well acquainted with the term and concept of cognition. However, just to review, cognition refers to a set of variables related to quantitative and qualitative type of knowledge and its relationship amongst other types of knowledge elements. An imperative aim of cognitive science is to generate theoretical models that specify how people function. In this module, we will primarily focus on the interaction of cognition with other vital correlates such as intelligence, emotion, language, culture, etc. The text will emphasize the determining impact of cognition on such areas and in return how cognitive process is affected by them. In other words, the cause and effect relationship between cognition and its correlates will be explored. The interrelationship between various faculties is highlighted and attempts are directed to answer questions such as, is cognition same as intelligence or a difference can be discerned? What comes first, cognition or emotion? Are cognition and language same fraternities or is personality a predictor of cognition, etc.? 3. Impact of cognition on its correlates. 3.1 Cognition and intelligence. There are different views on relationship between cognition and intelligence. There is lack of integration on the view that whether cognition and intelligence are same or different. Majority of the researchers believe that a thin line of difference does exist. However, another view supports that cognition and intelligence are same. In line with the former view, cognition can be conceived as a process of integration, accommodation and application of knowledge. It includes the process by which sensory information can be used, stored, reduced, elaborated, transformed and recovered for its application to daily life activities. It encompasses the course of how information is acquired and way it is used, hence acquisition and application appear to be at the nucleus. Thus the implicit processes of sensation, attention, perception, thinking, learning, memory constitute the cognitive capacity of an individual. Intelligence, on the other hand, is viewed to be included as a part of cognitive process. It entails transforming cognitive knowledge into meaning and explicit application of this knowledge to solve daily life problems. Cognition acts as an umbrella term including all the vital processes such as perception, thinking, memory, attention and intelligence indeed being a part of the cognitive process. Also the fact that intelligence quotient or IQ is a measure of cognitive ability and application of such abilities to understand concepts and solve problems is also clear evidence that cognition and intelligence are two different constructs where former includes the latter. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. The other view does not define a clear distinction between cognition and intelligence. They believe both the constructs to be similar with no defined boundaries. For instance, Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale weighs one of the most relied upon intelligence test measures intelligence but not common sense. The test is not able to explain why people with equal IQ perceive things differently or why success in life for IQ and gifted range is higher than genius. The difference between the two also seems to fade when emotional intelligence is equated with cognitive intelligence. The term cognitive intelligence here clearly assimilates both the constructs and has also separated itself with types of intelligence such as social intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, etc. It has primarily referred to the intellectual abilities such as thinking, reasoning, logical differencing, analyzing, prioritizing, etc. In contrast, emotional intelligence involves the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate amongst them and to use this information to guide one's thinking. Then emotional intelligence comprises of three factors broadly of self and others, i.e. appraisal and expression of emotions, regulation of emotions and utilization of emotions. The concept of emotional intelligence differs itself from conventional interrelationship between cognition and effect as it does not concentrate primarily on memory or judgment alone but on holistic general contribution of emotionality to personality. Thus difference between IQ and EQ is also quite clear. IQ is obtained through a ratio which is an index of a person's ability to learn, understand and use information in a meaningful way, whereas EQ is an index of person's ability to recognize, appraise, manage and use one's emotions as well as others so as to facilitate a productive life. IQ deals with abilities of understanding and comprehending information while EQ deals with recognizing and comprehending emotions. IQ is mathematical and logical powers of an individual and EQ is the emotional ability towards self and others. In an IQ test, items pertain to logical and abstract reasoning, whereas in EQ test, scale items relate to emotional responses in different situations. IQ is a strong predictor of success in school and EQ is strong predictor of success in life. EQ can be learned whereas IQ can't be taught as part of it is believed to be innate. Correlation of performance on IQ and EQ is not strong. For example, an autistic child may perform well on IQ but may not. IQ is obtained through a ratio which is an index of a person's ability to learn, understand and use information in a meaningful way, whereas EQ is an index of person's ability to recognize, appraise, manage and use one's emotions as well as others so as to facilitate a productive life. IQ deals with abilities of understanding and comprehending information while EQ deals with recognizing and comprehending emotions. IQ is mathematical and logical powers of an individual and EQ is the emotional ability towards self and others. In an IQ test, items pertain to logical and abstract reasoning, whereas in EQ test, scale items relate to emotional responses in different situations. IQ is a strong predictor of success in school and EQ is strong predictor of success in life. EQ can be learned whereas IQ can't be taught as part of it is believed to be innate. Correlation of performance on IQ and EQ is not strong. For example, an autistic child may perform well on IQ but may not have a good index of EQ. IQ determines individual capacities and intelligence and EQ decides for your teamwork and crisis intervention. In spite of the differences, nevertheless, both the fraternities, cognition and intelligence seem to equally rely on each other. Without information processing system, its application cannot happen and no vitality of processing and integrating system can be gauged without assessing its applications. Therefore the two constructs, though distinct in conceptualization also seem to be dependently integrated, each assisting the other in way human beings perceive the world and act upon the environment. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 3.2 Cognition and emotion. The duality between cognition and emotion has fascinated the psychologists and philosophers since centuries. Most of the research in this area has been primarily based on identification of brain areas involved in the dynamic process. The recent development focuses on the interactional fit between both the aspects, giving rise to complex behavior. The attempts of the conventional researchers have been to separate cognitive brain from the emotional brain, whereas the recent trends have opposed such a clear distinction out of three reasons, i.e., A, brain regions involved in cognition are also functional in emotions, B, brain regions involved in emotions are also a part of the cognitive process, and C, cognition and emotion both are integrated in the brain. As a result, dividing the brain into cognitive and affective regions is inherently troublesome and thus not a possibility. However, a clear rejection of either of the views is not a possibility until we delve into the complex process. 3.2.1 Conceptualization of cognition and emotion. Cognitive capacity of strong controlled processes is considered unique to human species. The various domains of cognition such as attention, memory, perception, and learning seem to be completely goal-directed and prevented from interferences. The strongest correlate of cognition is neural firing from dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Most of the literature reveals engagement of cortical regions in the cognitive process. However, the same cannot be simply articulated for emotions. There is less agreement on definition of emotions nonetheless. Some accepted meaning of emotions include it to be states as elicited by rewards and punishers, emerge from conscious appraisal of events, have physiological basis and range from simple happy to complex moral emotions, pride, jealousy. The brain structures involved in emotion include amygdala, ventral striatum and hypothalamus. The functioning of such subcortical regions mediating emotions is at times believed to be a less conscious process. The human is many times unaware of the stimulus that triggers functioning in emotional brain areas. As a result of the inherent intricate processes involved in both cognition and emotion, it certainly becomes difficult to concretely define both the concepts. 3.2.2 Affective brain regions in cognition. There has been constant disagreement over the regions that are purely affective and constitute affective brain. Hypothalamus was one of the primitive regions believed to play a strong role in emotions. Later, robust role of limbic system was identified in emotional regulation. However, the recent trends revealed that many areas in the limbic system such as hippocampus were not found to be connected to emotions, and other areas which were observed to control emotions were not included in the limbic system like orbitoprefrontal cortex. As a result, a pure composition of emotional brain has not been possible. Attempts have been directed to identify core and extended regions of the brain that play a role in emotions. Core regions are primary areas which are believed to have strong functioning, whereas extended regions are those which have almost a secondary role to play in emotional regulation. Examples of core regions include amygdala, hypothalamus, nucleus accumbens, orbitoprefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex and ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Extended regions include ventral segmental area, hippocampus, basal forebrain, prefrontal cortex, anterior temporal lobe, posterior cingulated cortex and somatosensory cortex. Even with the identification of core and extended regions, the problem doesn't simplify, as many of these regions are also included in the various other cognitive. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Functions. To cite an example, amygdala, a core affective region, is observed to have a crucial role in processing of fearful stimuli. To an extent, it is identified as the fear center. However, the same area has been found to play a significant role in attention and associative learning as well. Whalen, 1998, Baxter and Murray, 2002, and Sander and Zala, 2003. Various evidences converge to the view that amygdala does not only control emotions but also produces attentional responses. Schaefer et al., 2006, and Schaefer-Gray, 2007. 3.2.3 Cognitive brain regions in emotions. The prefrontal cortex (PFC) is believed to have a significant role in the control and execution of cognitive functions. It is observed to exhibit critical role in attention, maintenance and manipulation of information, detection of conflict and expression of cognitive control in challenging situations. However, as discussed above, PFC is also identified as the extended affective region. Various PFC territories such as anterior cingulated cortex, orbitoprefrontal cortex and ventromedial prefrontal cortex are involved in emotions roles. 2005, Damasio, 1999, and Davidson and Irwin, 1999. Nonetheless, the recent literature focuses on robust role of PFC in the cognitive process. This duality leads to strong compartmentalization of PFC into areas that control emotions and others that control cognition. Blush, Liu and Posner, 2000. For instance, orbitoprefrontal cortex and ventromedial cortex play a role in emotions, whereas dorsolateral prefrontal cortex dominates cognitive control. With such strong heterogeneity, it thus becomes almost a challenge to mark affective brain separate from cognitive brain. 3.2.4 Integration of cognition and emotion. Above text clearly depicts that the view for separation of cognitive and affective brain areas is primarily deficient, and both the fraternities seem to somehow merge with each other. Advancements in the literature have been able to generate evidences for fusion of cognition and emotion, such as depicted in functional studies, structural connectivity, circuits for cognitive emotional integration, and functional connectivity. Functional studies indicate that lateral prefrontal cortex (LPFC) is the area of integration for both cognition and emotion. Especially, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex (DLPFC), which has primarily been identified as cognitive area, is also believed to be a core affective area. Support for hypothesis comes from working memory studies, behavioral inhibition experiments, and proposals for integration of cognition and motivation. Territories of LPFC such as ventromedial prefrontal cortex, orbitoprefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex have been found to be the areas where interaction of both emotion and cognition takes place. On the other hand, structural connectivity of anatomical information suggests that any brain region is just a few synapses distant from the other, where brain almost appears as a small world topology. In a research, PFC was found to be most distant from sensory areas, which meant that PFC almost received processed information for higher cognitive treatment. Another finding revealed amygdala as equally distant from sensory areas and is the hub of forming various other cortical connections. This core affective area is thus found to be a nucleus for interaction of cognition and emotion. Young, Scannell, Burns and Blakemore, 1994. Nevertheless, circuits of interaction also indicate evaluation of sensory information through the visual cortex. Both amygdala and orbitoprefrontal cortex are appropriately well situated from the visual cortex for adequate sensory evaluation. Both the areas also share strong reciprocal connections in order to make better perceptual and emotional sense of the sensory information. A cognitive affective control circuit is also highlighted instead of the pure cognitive executive control circuit. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Finally, to summate the cognitive affective integration, a conceptual model was proposed by Pessow, 2008. The proposal stated that any given brain area forms multiple neural connections. As a result, the brain area is involved in multi-purpose functioning, and similarly, the neural computation may be used by many areas. This neural mapping forms the basis of behavior. Thus, with this multifarious complexity, it is almost impossible to separate the cognitive and affective connections of behavior. Consequently, a change in the affective dimension of behavior also introduces a change in the cognitive dimension. Hence, cognitive and affective categories integrate with each other to form complex behavior. 3.3 Cognition and language. The relationship between cognition and language has long amazed cognitivists and linguists. The question whether cognition and language are two separate entities or language emerges from general cognitive abilities still lacks a firm conclusion. Also, certain other questions such as do people who speak different languages think differently or certain development of cognitive abilities is essentially required for language acquisition still pose a challenge. Such concerns have been pervasive in the fields of psychology, linguistics, neuroscience and anthropology. 3.3.1 Concept of cognition and language. The entanglement of cognition and language has been difficult to resolve. However, the cognitive revolution has aimed to propose cognition as a powerful entity with set of various mental abilities including language. The controversy has invited broadly two perspectives, one which is known as general cognitive view and the other is mental module approach. The former approach suggests general purpose cognition is the foundation for all abilities of human intelligence. The support for this universal ability has been gathered from tasks such as pattern completion and category induction. The latter view stressed onto the differences between language and other abilities. It suggested cognition to involve distinct mental abilities, each requiring a different learning mechanism. The support for this view emerges from neuroimaging findings where separate brain areas are found in functioning of various cognitive abilities such as memory, learning, language, motor coordination, etc. The recent trends to understand the architecture of cognition have focused on the interdisciplinary and interaction of cognition with other mental abilities. In order to understand the link between cognition and language, it is important to throw light on famous linguist Noam Chomsky's view of generative linguistics. This view has constantly prevailed for years and produced a landmark in the linguist field. Chomsky conceptualized language abilities as similar to any mental organ. He believed that children are equipped with set of specific language abilities also called the language acquisition device or universal device. His view of language acquisition was completely in opposition to the conventional behaviorist view which proposed that most of the language is learned through behavioral modeling or imitation of parents. He suggested that children do not learn language through general problem-solving skills but rather through innate language-specific abilities. His theory was called generative linguistics as its primary goal was to define mental structures that could potentially generate grammatically valid sentences. Chomsky also proposed autonomy of syntax, hypothesis which stated that syntax is unique human capacity which operates independent of meaning of words in the sentence. With the advent of artificial intelligence in psychology and the metaphor of brain as computer and mind as its software led Chomsky also to state grammar as set of rules for Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Generation of words. In the later years of the century with the increasing interdisciplinarity, the tendency of the psychologists was to view cognition and language as common whereas linguists gave special treatment to the existence of language as unique and independent of cognition. Three major developments during 1980s and 1990s had major influence in redefining of cognition-language relationship i.e. connectionism, cognitive linguistics and cognitive neuroscience. Connectionism implicated intelligent behavior to emerge from large number of neuron-like processing units connected together into network topology that facilitated parallel processing. Such connectionism was also applied to English language to give past tense form of present tense verbs such as know, knew, meaning of ambiguous words and sentence formation such as, he drove the wheels and development of abstract categories from regular texts. This model developed commonality of computational architecture assuming base for cognition and language. Cognitive linguistics identified a subset of functional linguists who did not conform with Chomsky's view of special identity to language and generative grammar. They also rejected autonomy of syntax and suggested that language is for effective communication and grammatical rules are governed by the purpose and nature of communication. They proposed an understanding language with all its diversities such as narratives, dialects, discourse, psychosocial underpinnings of language, etc. Cognitive neuroscience also provided appeal to the cognitive linguistic perspective which emphasized the co-development of language and perceptual motor skills. It also supported language acquisition to be based on semantics and proposed for effective communication. It supported the epigenetic view of language i.e. it develops from the interaction of genes and environment during the prenatal and postnatal periods. They also proposed that neural correlates of grammar operate in harmony with other language components. The above view has depicted smooth transitions of relationships between cognition and language. The recent trend in their interaction has focused on the reducing distance and greater interdisciplinary of both the fraternities strongly contributing to the mind-brain analogy. 3.4 Cognition and personality. The duality of the fact that all people are same and yet none of them are same is a strong challenge for personality theorists. The complexity is also reflected in the impact of individual differences on cognitive capacities. Historically, the attempts have been directed towards finding a plausible link between cognition and personality. With the advent of cognitive revolution, the relationship between both the fraternities was first explicated by role of emotions in distortions of cognitive processing. Beck, 1967. Later, effects of state anxiety on cognitive performance were explored by Spielberger, 1972. The relationship of wider variety of traits with cognitive performance has been at focus since long. Recent studies have focused on developing information processing models based on specific traits. Following, customized models based on traits have been created to enhance performance in various organizations. Various theories have been proposed which aim to explain the link between cognition and personality from varied angles. 3.4.1 Biological theory. The biological explanation of personality and cognition was stated by Eysenck's arousal theory, 1967. The Yerkes-Dodson law, an inverted U depicts the relationship between. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Cortical arousal and performance. According to the theory, medium level of arousal is believed to be optimum for performance, whereas extreme levels of arousal on either ends of the continuum, i.e. high or low, produce negative effects on performance. For example, fatigue or excessive anxiety both can be damaging for performance. An adequate level of anxiety can facilitate performance. The theory also links arousal with personality traits, stating that cortical arousal in an introvert is easily established than in an extrovert. In other words, introverts might exhibit performance deficits in over-arousal situations, whereas extroverts may depict the same in under-arousal circumstances. The findings have been replicated in various other experiments such as time pressures or caffeine influences. Under both the states, extroverts were found to perform better than introverts. Another biological explanation proposing the link between cognition and personality was stated by reinforcement sensitivity theory Core, 2004. The theory aimed to establish link between impulsivity, anxiety and sensitivity of brain for rewards and punishments. These traits were believed to be important predictors of motivation and learning. The evidence of such interactions has been found in certain tasks such as performance, etc. Recent evidences using neuroimaging techniques such as fMRI have sought links between regional brain activation and personality effects such as extraversion and working memory. 3.4.2 Information processing theory. The proposition also supports link between personality traits and information processing capacity. The hypothesized link is established with 3 progressive steps, i.e. defining the nature of relationship, delineating a broad theory with general predictions, and finally developing a detailed computational model simulating the relationship. The formation of the customized computational model faces a challenge of describing the concepts very clearly and eliminates biases related to the concepts. Also, the dynamic nature of the personality effects has to be taken into consideration so as not to state short-term impact on cognition. Hence, information processing approach has to rely on strategies of self-regulation and self-knowledge to develop strategic computational models based on the established link. 3.4.3 Personality and self-regulation. The theory assumes that behavior is guided by schemata or self-representations that define goals for an individual. In case of performance, the person may get motivated to establish some minimum level of result attuned with maintenance of self-esteem. The nature of these motivations then is believed to be guided by the personality traits of the individual. For instance, Matthews and Deary, 2003 found that people with high levels of anxiety tend to underestimate their performance. Also, anxious people tend to overestimate the presence of threatening situations and negative consequences. The theory primarily supports the view that information processing biases should be understood in light of individual differences. 3.4.4 Cognitive adaptive theory of traits. This theory supposes that traits have functional coherence than structural coherence. Also, those traits are extremely subjective in nature and there is no single process that mediated between trait and its behavioral expression. These traits tend to get associated with multiple, independent biases reflected in variety of neural, computational and self-regulative processes. On the other hand, traits represent adaptation towards various challenges of life. A healthy adaptation leads to successful conquering of life threats and challenges. Thus, the cognitive correlates of personality traits may lead to strong acquisition and skill development. Adaptation may act as complex interface between cognitive capacities, personality construction and acquired learned skills. For example, the attention and memory bias of introverts towards threat may lead them to develop. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Adequate social skills for dealing with such challenges. Thus, the cognitive attribute of a given trait interacts with development of skill that supports the adaptation as a process. Adaptation trait. Genetics arousal. Neural network skills self-knowledge information. Processing. Early conditioning real-world adaptive behavior Fig 1. Cognitive adaptive process supporting personality traits. 3.4.5 Link between personality and cognitive domains. The link between personality and various domains of cognition such as attention, distractibility, memory, language, and fluid intelligence have also been stated. Attention and personality are believed to be closely associated. Attention can be understood as the limited capacity of the individual to process selected piece of information. Personality is viewed to influence this limited capacity, like for example anxious people generally seem to exhibit attentional deficits and higher distractibility. Extraversion is related to low attention capacity and introversion with greater attention span and lower arousal. Similarly, high impulsivity is related to greater arousal and attentional deficits. In case of personality and distractibility, extraversion and distractibility were found to be positively correlated. Also, neuroticism and anxiety were found to depict higher distractibility. Abnormal personality traits such as schizotypal personality are related with poor executive functioning and higher distractibility. Another imperative cognitive dimension of memory has also been viewed to share personality influences. Extroverts were found to have a higher short-term memory recall but a poor long-term memory. Anxiety and neuroticism as personality variables were found to have detrimental influences on working memory capacity and multitasking. Ashcraft and Krause, 2007. Early studies also established that people with trait anxiety are more vulnerable to encode threatening stimuli in comparison to people with state anxiety and also to depict a memory bias in recall of threatening stimuli than neutral stimuli. Willems et al., 1997. Personality influences are also viewed on the acquisition and use of language capacity of an individual. Extroverts as a part of profile are believed to be more equipped in language than introverts, but no literature supports higher linguistic processing and verbal ability in extroverts than introverts. However, extroverts were found to be more fluent in both first and second language use with fewer errors in speech than introverts. In terms of speech production, introverts may be slow, which can be attributed to deliberated information processing, whereas extroverts may be fast because of speedy information processing and reduced social anxiety. Duell and Furnham, 1999. In case of verbal problem-solving ability, extroverts are found to be deficient, but in instances of expression they perform better than introverts. Weinman, 1987. The relation between personality and fluid intelligence is diverse. Fluid intelligence is an index of reasoning and problem-solving ability in contrast to crystallized intelligence, an index of knowledge acquired throughout life. Cattell, 1971, Chamorro, Premuzic and Fernham, 2004. A weak relationship has been observed between personality and fluid intelligence. Ackerman and Hegestad, 1997, Ashton et al., 2000. However, several attempts have been directed towards Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Exploring the potential relation between intelligence and big 5 factors of personality: neuroticism, extraversion, openness to experience and conscientiousness. A small positive correlation was found between fluid intelligence, openness to experience and conscientiousness. Ashton et al., 2000, Goff and Ackerman, 1992. Austin et al., 2002, observed a negative correlation between neuroticism, psychoticism with intelligence. Overall, weak to moderate correlations are observed between varied personality dimensions and general fluid intelligence. Most of the above correlates such as intelligence, emotion, language and personality exhibit a robust relationship with cognition. This also depicts the importance and application of cognition in enhancing various related domains such as crystallized and fluid intelligence, emotional intelligence, appropriate emotional regulation and expression, language acquisition and use, linguistic proficiency and personality construction. 5. Summary. Cognition reflects quantitative and qualitative type of knowledge and its relationship with other faculties of knowledge. The interactional fit of cognition with other variables such as intelligence, emotions, language, personality, culture, etc. enables a holistic perspective to the vitality and application of cognition in our daily lives. Cognition and intelligence, though perceived similar, are two different fraternities where cognition is an umbrella term and intelligence is one of the domains of cognition. Cognition can be understood as the process of acquisition and internalization of knowledge, whereas intelligence involves giving meaning to the cognitive knowledge and applying it to solve everyday problems. Cognitive intelligence is indexed by intelligence quotient IQ, and emotional intelligence is gauged by emotional quotient EQ. Form an integral part of intelligence. IQ deals with abilities of understanding and comprehending information, while EQ deals with recognizing and comprehending emotions. The relationship of cognition and emotion cannot be understood as two separate independent faculties, but rather as interacting with each other to produce complex behavior. The interplay of cognition and language is viewed in use of speech in everyday problem solving. Cognition is considered as powerful entity with set of various mental abilities including language. However, different brain regions are observed in functioning of cognition and language. Cognition and personality both are viewed to impact each other. Various factors of personality such as introversion, extraversion, neuroticism, psychoticism, conscientiousness have been well correlated with cognitive variables such as attention, memory, language, fluid intelligence, etc. 2. Introduction. In the previous module, we have explored the concept of addiction and various substances that cause daily life addiction. In the present module, we will focus on different theoretical models explaining the cause of addiction. Since we are already acquainted with the idea of addiction, still for a recap, addiction is a global problem that causes various physical, psychological hazards and takes millions of lives each year. Addiction is viewed to be a compulsive physiological and psychological need for a substance causing clinically significant impairments in life. There are various definitions that explain addiction and emphasize on different components such as tolerance, withdrawal symptoms or loss of control, even when all may not occur essentially in every form of addiction. Every definition serves a purpose, so in case of addiction, since a broad definition may lack integrity, we may have different definition to explicate varied situation of addiction. Similarly, to have a holistic view of the process of addiction, it becomes imperative to delve into the various factors and interaction among these factors that lead to complex process of addiction. Hence, with the present module, we will focus on the important models that explain the process of addiction. 3. Models of addiction. A model is taken as a comprehensive mapping of the plausible interplay of various factors that cause addiction. Each of the models emphasize on specific variable which may play a dominant role in producing dependence on a substance or a behavioral response. In an attempt to analyze cause of any addictive behavior, a particular model may just seem as an appropriate explanation, whereas in other case, an eclectic approach of various models may justify the cause. 3.1 Biological model of addiction. According to this perspective, the cause of addiction lies in the biological mechanisms such as brain chemistry, neurochemical imbalances or genetic predispositions. The model views the process of addiction as a brain disease in which neural pathways of executive function become distorted along with amplification of associated motivational process. The distortion occurs as a result of interactional play between behavior and effects in brain after ingestion of a certain substance. The imperative role of reward pathways and neural circuitry in brain-causing addiction was proposed by Brewer and Potenza 2008. There are various areas of brain with specific functions that are involved in addiction. Amygdala is an important area controlling the emotional aspect of motivational stimuli in comparison to neutral stimuli. Orbitofrontal cortex and basolateral amygdala pose a strong function in meaningfully interpreting the stimuli and forming associative connections. Discriminative learning and cognitive control is established by Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. The anterior cingulated cortex and hippocampus plays a role in facilitating contextual memory associated with motivational stimuli. Nucleus accumbens are involved in expression of learned behavior and interpreting of motivational stimuli considered as pleasurable for the brain. In case of addiction, as factors that reinforce the addiction process such as stress increase, certain changes in the structure and the functions of these brain regions is observed which further promotes the addictive behavior. Also, in the advanced states of addiction, the reinforcing pleasurable influence is believed to move from ventral to the dorsal structures of striatum, which play a strong role in habit formation. Source: adapted from National Institute of Drug Abuse. Fig. 1. Depicting images of decreased metabolism in brain as a result of addiction. This model also attempts to answer the question of individual differences in acquisition of addiction. The approach suggests that the interactional forces between genetics and environment influence the acquisition of addictive behavior and also the type of substance addiction. However, the role of genetics is highlighted in acquisition and heritability of addictive behavior, which has been estimated with a rate of 30%-50%. Brewer and Potenza, 2008. In case of other dispositions than genetics, depression, impulsivity, stress and trait anxiety emerge as important predisposers which again influence the process of addictive behavior. Uhart and Wand, 2009, Breeze et al., 2011. Other factors such as reward sensitivity, poor ability to learn from mistakes and different neural configuration underlying such activities are considered to be important. Dang et al., 2011. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Fig. 2, depicting biological model of addiction. 3.2 Evolutionary model of addiction. Addictive behavior is generally conceptualized as a byproduct of biological, psychological and sociological influences. However, exploring the evolutionary basis of addiction becomes imperative as all the major influences are closely linked with the evolutionary origins. To understand such basis also becomes important so that rather than only focusing on the physiological and environmental causes, we can also uncover the evolutionary underpinnings of addiction as a global epidemic. It also enhances our understanding towards the question of individual and cultural differences in addiction. The evolutionary perspective states drug use and addictive behavior to be a part of the mammalian world since ancient times. Motivation for addiction comes from the reward systems located within the mammalian brain negotiating between the like and want for a substance. The initial like for substance later transforms into strong want of the same, carrying high survival value. Evolutionarily speaking, performing such pleasurable desires was thought as a sign of adaptation as it enhanced the survival value, like as eating or sex. It was considered as a natural inclination towards desire for pleasure. Mammalian brain and psychotropic plants have been thought of having similar evolutionary age and have strongly connected the drug use of facilitating adaptation to the environment. However, in recent times with all technological advancements, survival is not a pertinent question and thus addiction does not carry an adaptive value. Nevertheless, working on the idea of pleasure, addiction is believed to enhance the motivational reward structures and decrease the negative painful emotions such as anger, guilt, etc. At times, such external acting out of pleasure may be so rewarding that it may even deviate the person from natural intrinsically rewarding drives of hunger, thirst and sex. One thing that remains unchanged in evolutionary age and recent times is that substance addiction is hazardous to health and depicts long-term physiological and psychological deficits. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 3.3 Cognitive Theory of Addiction. This model views addiction as a result of faulty information processing of the addiction-related stimuli. Dysfunctional beliefs and erroneous decision-making is believed to be at the epicenter of the addictive behavior. The cognitive postulate that thoughts, beliefs and expectancies influence emotions and behavior strongly suggests the importance of accurate information processing in causing vulnerability to addiction. Since addiction is also a behavior, underlying thoughts and belief pattern is believed to play a robust role in causing and maintaining such behavior. The perspective also suggests that biases in information processing lead to positive emotions that reinforce addictive behavior. For instance, in case of attentional bias, the addict may seem to pay more attention to the stimuli related to the substance than any other neutral stimuli in comparison to non-addicts. Similar effect is also seen in terms of memory bias, where the addict may very differentially recall the positive effects of the alcohol abuse and motivationally forget the adverse effects of the substance addiction. So while walking over the road, the addict may have selective attention for alcohol-related stimuli such as hoarding or a shop and may selectively remember it out of all the events across the journey. This attentional and memory bias may further trigger a craving for the substance and reinforce the addiction cycle. Although the nature of these biases may vary according to the type of addiction and its difference with the non-addicts, still what remains common across is the magnification of positive belief outcome expectancies and minimization of negative expectancies of the addictive behavior. This outcome probability bias may also be fueled by inaccurate beliefs about the self, such as low self-esteem, or lack of confidence on being able to deal with withdrawal symptoms or cope with stress in absence of the addictive substance. However, beneficial fact may be that these inaccurate self-beliefs can be replaced by adaptive and accurate self-beliefs such as, many people do not require alcohol to deal with stress, so I may also need not depend on addiction necessarily, life can still be meaningful and adaptive without addiction. The cognitive model also explains addictions as a result of cognitive discrepancy within an individual. Festinger, 1957. It proposes that two conflictual thoughts create discrepancy and disharmony, and as a result the individual attempts measures to reduce this dissonance as closely as possible. In case of addiction, an alcoholic may develop dissonance with coexisting thoughts such as one's alcohol consumption is majorly affecting the occupational performance and efficiency of the individual. This dissonance may be reduced in one of the three ways, such as reducing alcohol consumption, not giving much importance to alcohol is the only reason for declining work performance, avoid thinking about the issue, and lastly to accept one's own range of problems and helplessness associated with addiction. The general way observed by addicts to deal with the dissonance is to deny the existence of the problem and exaggerate the positive effects and negative outcomes of the addiction. In acute circumstances, they also tend to depict and accept themselves as hopeless addicts and thus ignore implicit responsibilities as a part of own profile. Bloom and Schmeling, 1996. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Source: Hendershot et al., 2011. Substance abuse treatment. Substance abuse treatment, prevention, and policy. Fig. 3, depicting cognitive model of addiction and relapse. In case of craving, cognitive model presents a different explanation from learning theories which stated craving to be highly situational specific and to pervade even after the abstinence of addiction. The cognitive perspective suggested craving to play a vital role in the acquisition and maintenance of addictive behavior but did not emphasize on the interdependency of craving and addictive process. It proposed addictive behavior to occur independently of craving as it is regulated by automatic cognitive process whereas craving is regulated by non-automatic cognitive processes which may get activated in cases of interrupted drug use behavior or blocked drug use sequence. Hence, according to this perspective, craving does not emerge as a necessary condition of addiction. It also encourages presence of accurate beliefs related to craving such as cravings are temporary which may fade also, they are not life-threatening, they do not operate as a necessary condition and unfulfillment of craving may lead to extreme withdrawal symptoms etc. It thus focuses on treating addictive process with replacing inaccurate beliefs with more adaptive and accurate thought belief pattern. 3.4 Learning theory of addiction. These theories of addiction have been based on experimentations on the non-human species with which self-conscious thinking like humans is not involved. The theory proposes addiction as a result of learning and forming association between cues, responses and positive and negative reinforcements. Addiction thus emerges as a result of rewarding or powerful experiences such as pleasure, happiness etc. and avoidance of negative stimuli like anxiety, tension, sorrow etc. mediated by motivational needs such as desires, wishes, wants etc. Operant conditioning, a general learning theory focuses on the role of positive and negative reinforcers in increasing or decreasing the likelihood of occurrence of behavior. Positive. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Reinforcers are events that increase the likelihood of occurrence of behavior, for example, the pleasantry effect or euphoric. Mood induced after ingestion of cocaine may increase the probability of repetition of such behavior. On the other hand, negative reinforcers are events that terminate or avoid noxious or negative stimuli. For instance, an addict may continue use of heroin to avoid its negative strong withdrawal symptoms. Punishment, another technique used in operant conditioning, reduces the likelihood of occurrence of behavior as it is followed by aversive stimuli. In case of addiction, a negative response from the side of wife such as separation or divorce may act as a strong punishment and decrease the probability of occurrence of addictive behavior by the husband. The theory of operant conditioning, so called as the individual actively operates in the environment, has provided motivation-based explanations for the occurrence or termination of addictive behavior. Classical conditioning theory has also been used to explain addictive behavior. The perspective proposes association between stimuli and reflexive responses whereby the stimuli is closely predictive of another motivationally rich stimuli. Mook, 1995. Hence, normal stimuli such as a party may become motivationally significant when it gets associated with use of drugs like cocaine which may soothe strong biological or psychological pressures and anxieties. So next time, and chance of a party is a signal of opportunity for drug availability and use which propels the individual to actively approach the party. Incentive sensitization theory also aims to explain addictive behavior similar to etiological perspective. The theory proposes that increased frequency of self-administered drugs may cause neuroadaptation of the stimuli which reinforces the behavior not as a result of like but rather as a want. It emphasizes on the fact that with the repeated use of the drug, the body develops tolerance for the substance, as a result of which the person is compelled to consume the substance. Hence, the ingestion of the substance no more depends on the liking of it but rather a biological want of the body. Imitation theories suggest addiction to occur as a result of imitation of behavior patterns and assimilation of ideas and identities. Addiction as a behavior may be acquired from direct exposure to the ideas and behavior of models. As it is also called modeling or observational learning, it strongly focuses on identification of the addict in terms of behavior and ideology with the models expressing such behavior. There are strong evidences of exposure to models and acquisition of addictive behavior. Candle and Andrews, 1987, and the robust role of media in acquisition and maintenance of addictive behavior. Anderson et al., 2009, Lovato et al., 2011. Social learning theory suggests the role of both observation and cognition in learning of addictive behavior. The motivation to imitate models is strongly mediated by the equation of rewards and punishments that the model receives. This also determines the strength and frequency of occurrence of additive behavior. Another perspective in contrast to reward-punishment equation suggested automatic imitation of the behavior as stimulus-response compatibility. It rejected the importance of reward and punishment as received by the model but rather focused on association without even being aware of it. Hence, learning theories focus on importance of associations formed between stimuli and response and mediating role of cognition and implicit social structures in it. 3.5 Developmental model of addiction. Human development marks both biological growth and psychological maturity. The developmental model views addiction as result of psychological immaturity or arrested growth. Development marks the capacity to control unjustified impulses and work according to the Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Priorities, make judgments based on logical and abstract reasoning, discern meaning to their lives and view themselves and their actions in holistic perspective. A developmental delay thus may cause acting upon selfish desires, making impulsive and irrational decisions, dealing with purposelessness and meaninglessness in lives and to have an incomplete view of own self. Fig 4. Developmental model of addiction. Addiction also according to this perspective is a developmental delay or arrest. Genetic vulnerability, physiological states, psychological factors as stress, personality type and environmental influences such as peer group, societal norms may interact with each other to produce cognitive, social, emotional aberrations in development. The addict may respond to impulsive wish to consume a substance or may not be able to resist peer pressure. He may take an irrational decision of just tasting it once not being able to do it as a trigger of complete chain of addiction. He may not be able to perceive the harsh consequences and damage to own self and the society. Since most of the imperative developmental milestones occur during childhood or adolescence, a negligence or unawareness may lead to such kind of physiological and cognitive immaturity. In case of recovery or relapse prevention also, it almost becomes vital for the addict to view his deviant behavior in a larger holistic context and seek answers to questions such as, if I do not leave the substance, what will happen to my health? Who will take care of my family in future? How will I resolve the financial crisis? The addict has to develop insight over his behavior, extend the will to quit the substance, and manage the withdrawal symptoms. According to the developmental perspective, an addict goes through the following states while recovering from the abuse of the substance. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 1. Transition. The intermittent period for the addict to realize that now safe use of substance is no more possible. 2. Stabilization. The stage where individual encounters withdrawal symptoms and plans how to avoid precipitating places or events. 3. Early recovery. The stage where individual desires to live a chemical-free lifestyle and recover the lost relationships that promotes abstinence. 4. Middle recovery. Continuing from the success of early recovery, where individual aims to sustain with chemical-free life and balanced lifestyle. 5. Late recovery. The stage where the individual rehabilitates completely to the society and aims to restructure the dysfunctional beliefs about own self that acted as a catalyst to the process of addiction. 6. Maintenance. Most imperative stage where the individual develops capacity to refrain from the use in substance in most stressful circumstances and preserve the reconstructed relations and the view of own self. The developmental model thus places deep importance onto the achievement of cognitive milestones and biological strength to deal and resist the entrapment of self in the complex nexus of addiction. 3.6 Rational choice model of addiction. This model proposes that addiction emerges as a result of rational choice made after constant negotiation reflecting the positive outcomes of the addictive behavior. The choice is based on rational reasons and analysis of the costs and benefits of addictive behavior. Most of the addicts outweigh benefits than costs of addiction. The benefits are based on expectancies or probabilities arising out of the likelihood of the outcomes of addiction. This perspective completely emphasizes on the expectancies or utilities that one perceives to the choice of addiction. For example, after consuming alcohol, if an individual enjoys the pleasantry effects and places low value over the depreciating health or rift in interpersonal problems, then of course he is outweighing benefits over the cost of alcohol use and paving way for its addiction. In this way, most of the addictive behavior is caused as a result of higher perceived utilities than evaluated harm. Subjective expected utility. Edwards, 1961, also depicts a similar perspective where an individual almost maintains a kind of account in which they assign a utility to an outcome, compare it with other alternatives present, and then choose the action that has maximum sum of utilities. In case of addiction, the dependence over the substance is viewed to serve valued functions and is estimated to be better than the existing or alternating lifestyles. Hence, feeling of enjoyment, relief from anxiety are perceived to have a higher utility than the loss of health. The extension of subjective utility theory was made by Theory of Rational Addiction, Becker and Murphy, 1988, by adding a new concept of discounting utility. The notion explains the general behavior of addict where he may rationally attribute low utility to hazardous events that may occur in future. Hence, an addict may discount the effects of potential hazardous consequences of substance abuse or dependence. Theory of Planned Behavior. Eisen, 1991, as derived from Theory of Reasoned Action, Fishbein and Eisen, 1975, also explains addiction in terms of rational choices. The perspective proposes that Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Choice of any behavior is dependent upon the three factors primarily, such as analysis of subjective expected utility, perceived control over the situation, and expectations of significant others from us. In case of addiction, the expected utility of a substance such as heroin may be high, the perceived control over the situation may be low, and the behavior may occur in the presence of peers that may foster the action. Another analogous perspective that relies on the evaluation of fear appeals is given by protection motivation theory. Rogers, 1975. The ideology states that the rational choice of any action depends on primary four factors such as subjective severity of threatened event, the perceived probability of the vulnerability of self with severe consequences, efficacy of the preventive behavior, and perceived ability of self to exhibit such preventive behavior. Thus, according to this view, addictive behavior can be understood as low perceived severity of threat produced by substance, low vulnerability of the self to be affected by the dire consequences such as liver damage, low efficacy of the preventive measures, and less ability of the self to act on preventive measures. All the above theories focus on choice of addiction made rationally and logically by the individual and hence ignores addiction as a result of biological predispositions or learned behavior. 3.7 Biopsychosocial Spiritual Model of Addiction. This model has developed as an extension to widely accepted biopsychosocial model of causation and treatment. The BPS model focuses on the interaction between biological, psychological, and sociological factors in development of an aberrant behavior. It states that any abnormality is an interactional play of biological factors such as genetic predispositions, neurochemical imbalances, psychological factors such as stress, anxiety, emotional vulnerability, cognitive dysfunction, and sociological components such as society, family, peer groups, norms, etc. Each of these factors does not operate in isolation but rather are codependent on each other. Hence, the treatment also has to target all the factors rather than focusing only on biological or psychological factors. To this technical concept of BPS model, spirituality was added later to answer the question of individual differences in acquisition and maintenance of pathology. Spirituality was considered as individuals' highest capacity to search meaning and purpose in life, and this capacity is believed to play a significant role in the acquisition, maintenance, and recovery of the disorder. A connection with God is believed to be at the epicenter of the spiritual model. Thus, addiction may result from disconnection with God, leading to a lack of harmony in the life of the addict. God here necessarily may not indicate a specific religion but rather a spiritual anchor which may vary from religion to religion. Recovery from addiction, thus, will involve re-establishing the lost connection with the higher power and coming in line with the spiritual anchor. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Fig 5. Biopsychosocial-spiritual model of addiction. Fig 5. Biopsychosociospiritual model of addiction. Addiction. Biological. Genetics. Neurochemistry, immune response, disability. Sociological. Interpersonal relationships, cultural traditions. Peer group, socioeconomic status. Spiritual. Meaningfulness, purpose of life. Religion, existential viability. Psychological. Learning, memory, emotions, perceptions, beliefs. Attitude. Psychology paper number 1. Cognitive science. The notion of spirituality becomes extremely essential in terms of treatment of addiction and generates various new intervention possibilities. It explains recovery of addiction as reviving the connection with the spiritual anchor and merging it with the physical self. Gaining the true authentic self, humanity, and reuniting it with the spiritual self may involve a lot of meaning in the recovery of the addict. Regaining the meaning and purpose of life, integrating it with physiological self, psychological being, and sociological components state the basic purpose of biopsychosociospiritual model. Added is the notion of morality, which may develop from religious groundings or moral schools such as parents, also help in delaying the acquisition of addiction, preventing relapse, and achieving complete abstinence. Spirituality can be used differently in treatment programs. Theists may suggest gaining guidance from a spiritual guru or practitioner, whereas non-theists may focus on search of meaning and purpose in life as a measure of gaining spiritual sense. The treatment program thus should be customized and be consistent with the inner beliefs of the addict. Also, the fact that spirituality has gained scientific agreement and momentum, it has now been believed to play an imperative role in the treatment of various pathologies including addiction. All the above models view the causation of addiction from different perspectives. Some highlight the aberrations in the biological mechanisms such as genetics, neuroanatomical disturbances as the cause of addiction, whereas some focus on the role of cognitive, self-conscious thinking, learning associations, rational decisions, and etiological construction of addiction. Others may also emphasize on integrative role of biological, cognitive, sociological, and spiritual factors in leading to addiction. The multiplexity and causation of the complex behavior of addiction may thus warrant recovery also to be multifaceted. Recovery thus emerges to be extremely complex and subject to vulnerabilities in addiction. Such challenges must be understood by the therapist, and serious consideration to the personal and family dynamics of the patient should be given by the therapist. Recovery, all the more, poses a challenge in case of women and children where the precipitating factors operate like a web and diminish the capacity of vulnerable sect to come out of the nexus of addiction.